They say children see what adults choose to ignore, but no one believed the boy who couldn't speak until his silence became the loudest scream in the hospital. It was a Tuesday night when they wheeled him into St. Catherine's Medical Center, a small figure lost beneath white sheets, his body limp and his eyes wide open but distant, as if he had seen something no child should ever witness. The paramedics said they found him alone in an abandoned house on the east side of town, unconscious, with no identification and no family searching for him. The doctors worked through the night to stabilize him, pumping fluids into his veins and monitoring every breath, every fragile heartbeat that threatened to stop. When he finally opened his eyes the next morning, the attending physician, Dr. Helen Marsh, leaned over him with a gentle smile and asked him his name, where he lived, what had happened to him. But the boy just stared at her, his lips pressed together, his small hands gripping the sheets as if holding on to the only solid thing left in his world. They ran tests, scanned his brain, checked his throat, his vocal cords, every possible medical reason for his silence. Everything came back normal. He could speak, the specialist confirmed, but he chose not to. Trauma, they concluded. Some terrible event had stolen his voice, locked it away behind a wall of fear too high for a 7-year-old to climb. The hospital named him John Doe, because even in his silence he needed to be called something, needed to be seen as more than just a mystery occupying bed 12 in the pediatric wing. The nurses rotated shifts, each one trying in their own way to reach him, bringing him coloring books and puzzles, speaking to him in soft voices, hoping that kindness might unlock whatever door had closed inside him. He would nod sometimes, shake his head other times, but never once did a sound escape his lips. Dr. Marsh became his primary advocate, the one who sat by his bedside during her breaks, reading him stories, telling him that he was safe now, that whatever happened before couldn't hurt him anymore. And for the most part, he seemed calm, his vital signs steady, his small body slowly regaining strength. But then Nurse Rebecca Holloway started her rotation on the pediatric floor, and everything changed. The first time she walked into his room, clipboard in hand, professional smile fixed on her face, the monitors beside his bed erupted in alarm. His heart rate spiked from 70 beats per minute to 140 in seconds. His breathing became rapid and shallow, and his eyes, those dark haunted eyes, filled with a terror so pure it made the other nurse in the room step back instinctively. Rebecca frowned, checking the monitors, asking if he was in pain, but the boy just pressed himself against the headboard, as far from her as the bed would allow, his whole body trembling. They thought it was a panic attack, some random trigger that reminded him of his trauma, so they sedated him lightly, and Rebecca left the room, promising to check on him later. But it happened again the next day, and the day after that, every single time Rebecca entered his room, the same violent reaction, the same silent scream written across his face. The other nurses started to notice, whispering in the break room, wondering what it was about Rebecca that terrified him so completely. Rebecca herself seemed disturbed by it, insisting she had never seen the boy before, had no connection to whatever had happened to him, but the reaction was undeniable. Dr. Marsh ordered a psychiatric evaluation, brought in specialists who worked with traumatized children, and they all agreed that the boy was exhibiting classic signs of PTSD, triggered by something about Rebecca, perhaps her appearance, her voice. Something that connected to his trauma in ways they couldn't yet understand. Rebecca requested to be removed from his care, and the hospital administration agreed, deciding it was best for everyone involved. With Rebecca no longer assigned to his floor, the boy's episodes stopped, his vitals returned to normal, and the staff breathed a collective sigh of relief, believing the problem was solved. But the boy hadn't forgotten, and in the quiet hours when the hospital slept and only the night shift walked the dimmed corridors, he began trying to communicate. Clipboard in hand. The monitors beside his bed erupted in alarm. His whole body trembling. The hospital administration agreed, deciding it was best for everyone involved. It started with simple gestures, pointing at objects, nodding or shaking his head with more purpose. And then one night, Sarah Chin, a young nurse fresh out of school, noticed him moving his hands in deliberate patterns. She had taken a basic sign language course in college, enough to recognize that what he was doing wasn't random. He was trying to spell something, letter by letter, slow and painstaking. Sarah grabbed a notepad and sat beside him, encouraging him to continue, and he did, his small fingers forming letters in the air, repeating them when she didn't understand, his eyes intense with the need to be heard. It took nearly an hour, but finally Sarah had it written down, a message that made her blood run cold. She heard the others, the note read, and when Sarah looked up at him, her hand shaking slightly, he nodded and pointed toward the door, then made the sign for Rebecca's name, which he had learned by watching the staff sign to each other. Sarah felt her stomach drop, her mind racing through the implications of what he was telling her, but she kept her voice calm, asked him to explain more, to show her what he meant. The boy's hands moved faster now, spelling out words, painting a picture that seemed impossible, yet his face held no deceit, only the desperate need to be believed. He told her, through his careful signs, that he had been in the hospital before, months ago, brought in by a foster family for a minor procedure, something routine that should have been simple. But during his stay, he had seen things, terrible things that happened when the lights went down and the senior staff went home. He had seen Rebecca enter rooms where children slept, children who were too sick to wake easily, too weak to fight back. He had watched through the crack in his door as she administered injections that weren't ordered, adjustments to IVs that made alarms go silent, and he had heard her whisper to those sleeping children that it would all be over soon, that they wouldn't suffer anymore. And then those children stopped breathing, one after another over several weeks, and the hospital called them complications, unexpected declines, the tragic reality of children who were already so sick. But this boy knew better. He had seen the truth, and when Rebecca noticed him watching one night, when she realized that this little witness had seen too much, she came into his room with that same needle, that same deadly intention. But he fought, kicked, screamed with a voice he still had then, and in the chaos, he managed to escape, running through the hospital corridors, bursting through an emergency exit, disappearing into the night before she could stop him. He ran until he couldn't run anymore, hid in that abandoned house where fear and exhaustion finally claimed him, where his voice died from the weight of what he knew, and where the paramedics found him weeks later, a ghost of the boy he had been. Sarah sat frozen, the notepad trembling in her hands, her mind rejecting the story, even as every instinct told her the boy was telling the truth. She wanted to dismiss it, to believe it was the confused narrative of a traumatized child, but his details were too specific, his fear too genuine. She asked him how many children had he seen Rebecca hurt, and he held up 7 fingers, then 8, then seemed to lose count, shaking his head as tears finally spilled down his cheeks. Sarah knew she had to tell someone, but who would believe the signed testimony of a silent child against a veteran nurse with 15 years of impeccable service? She made a decision that would either save lives or destroy her career. She went to Dr. Marsh, woke her at 2 in the morning with a phone call, and told her everything. Dr. Marsh arrived at the hospital within 30 minutes, her face grave, and together they sat with the boy as he repeated his story, his hands spelling out the names of children that Sarah and Dr. Marsh looked up in the hospital database. Children who had all died during Rebecca's shifts, deaths that had been attributed to their underlying conditions. 1 death was a tragedy, 2 was unfortunate, but 8 children over the course of 6 months, all under the care of the same nurse. That was a pattern. Dr. Marsh contacted the hospital administrator, who contacted the board, who contacted the police, and by dawn, Rebecca Holloway was being escorted into an interrogation room while investigators began pulling medical records, interviewing staff. and examining the security footage that the hospital had never thought to review. What they found confirmed the boy's story in horrifying detail: footage of Rebecca entering rooms alone, spending far longer than necessary with patients, and in several cases, children who were stable before her visits crashed within minutes of her leaving. The toxicology reports from the deceased children, which had never been deeply analyzed because their deaths seemed explainable, were ordered to be re-examined, and they found traces of substances that should never have been in their systems. Medications that would stop a heart, that would shut down breathing, that would make a sick child's death look like the inevitable conclusion of their illness. Rebecca confessed within 72 hours, not out of remorse, but because the evidence was insurmountable. She told the investigators that she had been helping them, ending their suffering, playing the role of mercy in a world that forced children to endure endless pain. She showed no understanding of the horror of what she had done, no recognition that she had become the monster in the very place meant to heal. The boy, still silent but finally heard, was placed in protective custody and then into the care of a family who specialized in fostering children with trauma, people who understood that healing takes time, that trust must be earned slowly and with infinite patience.